Strategic Planning Committee for February 18, 2019 is called to order. Roll call. Secretary, everyone is present. And if you might, Mr. Clark, do the invocation.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Dear Lord, we thank you for this day. Lord, we ask that you look out on all our folks in law enforcement and our military. We ask that you keep a guiding hand over them, that they will continue to have the ability to protect us. Lord, we ask that tonight and all nights thus forth, that we continue to keep the respect for each other as we represent our districts and display the needs of the people that we represent. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
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 I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There's no chairs addition. Public comment period. If you wish to speak, please sign and fill out the green and red card. And I'm requesting, if you want to speak on item number 6, I would wish you wait till after the presentation is done. We would hear anyone who have a public speaking card. Item number 5, approval of November 8, 2018 strategic planning minutes.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Doc Sagler, second by Mr. Cagliari. No objection? Approved. Item number 6, discussion of limited floodplain management field. I know we have Ms. Melissa on that, but Mr. Jerome gonna handle this part of the meeting as far as the people coming up and speak. Jerome, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'd like to kind of basically give an overview, and I have 3 professionals here to speak on this issue. Mr. Sean Chereau with CSRS, who's our engineering review agency engineer. Melissa Kennedy with HNTB, who's doing a lot of work in floodplain management for the parish. And I have Janet Thorpe with CPEX, who's working currently on our master land use plan, who'll be able to give you some information on some other items. But I'd like to first start off with a general statement about what's currently in play with the parish in terms of floodplain. Zimmerman, can you distribute that? I'm handing out an item that will be used as part of the discussion on adjacent parishes and other jurisdictions. Right now, as it relates to fill in the parish, our ordinance is under the drainage portion of the Unified Land Development Code, and there are 3 parts to this particular ordinance. One is a limitation to the level of 3 feet of fill that's on parcels that are less than a half acre in size. Any parcel that's less than a half acre in size cannot put more than 3 feet of fill on their property, all right? These are individual lots out there, all right? If there's an individual lot that's greater than a half acre in size, that property can go above 3 feet individually, and they can put 4 or 5, however many feet of fill in order to meet the base flood requirement elevation requirements. But they have to mitigate that portion of the fill that's over 3 feet. So if they put in 5 feet of fill, they're going to have to mitigate the other 2 feet of fill on the property, all right? That's in our code right now. For those properties that lie or in a subdivision, or they're a commercial property, they have to mitigate any level of fill on their property, whether it's 1 feet, 5 feet, 8 feet, all right? And we do have properties that have been developed recently with a lot of fill on it. They have mitigated that amount of fill by the use of detention ponds and other mechanisms on the property, all right? So that's the way our ordinance reads right now. I'd like to bring up right now Melissa Kennedy to kind of explain a little bit how that operates from an engineering perspective, and Sean Chiro also can address that from an engineering perspective, all right? So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jerome. Thank you, council members. I have a little presentation that I'm going to go through. Basically, I want to go through what the HNTB task order was for this overall program and fill specifically. So I'm just going to give a little brief overview about floodplain fill impacts, just examples, and then I want to talk about the HNTB fill evaluation history and our findings relating to the fill. And then go over the ordinances a little bit more detail than what Jerome just did, and then kind of show you a map that we developed that shows what the recommendations, the impacts are. So this is just an overall schematic. This is an example of what can happen when you fill in the floodplain and you don't mitigate for it. This example shows what the floodplain and what the base flood elevation was before the fill and what it is after the fill. I'm not saying this is what's being done necessarily in Ascension Parish. I'm just saying this is what can happen if you're not addressing these concerns. And in this instance, it's not just fill in the floodplain. You're also impacting the conveyance of the water in the existing channel. So those are some of the things that we look at. Again, this is an example. I don't even know where this is, but this, and in general, if you look on the left, you can see how the left side is built up, and on the right side of the water, it's lower. So during a flooding event, clearly the water is going to migrate to the left side. So that's just another example. Again, I'm not saying that's what's done here. And then here, this is a little video. What this shows is the yellow is areas of higher ground potential fill in a floodplain. And the little arrows are showing, the little white lines are showing the flow of water. And you can see where the flow of water wants to go where the fill is currently, and it now is forced around it. So it's just an indication that's showing that then this is not an appropriate type of fill. You've now impeded the flow, and you may not have compensated for storage of that fill that you've put in the floodplain. Again, this is an example. It's not anywhere in Ascension Parish. It's just an example that I wanted to demonstrate the issues that are out there. So what HNTB was tasked to do is to evaluate different ordinance strategies within a case study watershed. And then early on when we started, we were requested by some members of the Drainage Board, could we do a quick 30-day qualitative review of your ordinances and come up with some recommendations? So those two things were kind of going on at the same time. As a result of that, of reviewing all the existing ordinances, and we're not talking just the drainage, we looked at the subdivision, we looked at the flood damage reduction ordinance, we looked at all the ones that had anything to do with building in a floodplain. And we noticed that there's too many documents, inconsistency, lack of cross-referencing on a lot of the documents. There was lack of clear guidance in some of the submittal requirements, and then gaps in some of the design requirements, and some of those design requirements were outdated. So we also found that there was a disconnect between the policies that you have in place and what the ordinance were saying. So what we wanted to do is bring all that, tie that back together, make it clearer, fix those obvious things that could be fixed relatively easily. So we recommended to edit the drainage ordinance, LDC, Appendix 5 drainage ordinance, and revise your current drainage impact study policy document. That's the document that provides the requirements for doing drainage impact studies for these developments in a floodplain. So those were the main things that we came out and said needed to be done. So the things that we specifically said that we wanted to do for the Appendix 5 drainage ordinance, let's clarify your fill requirements for individual subdivision and commercial properties, 3-foot max. We came up with that mostly because we felt that was the original intent of the ordinance when you read it. It was very confusing and not clear between all the different types of properties and development on what was intended. So that's what we felt was appropriate. In addition, we wanted to clarify and add some new definitions. We had definition for detention, backwater, some other things. And then we said, let's revise the drainage impact study policy, which provides the guidance for meeting the ordinance. And we said, we expanded and clarified the submittal requirements for the impact study policies. In terms of modeling, in terms of conveyance requirements, it was not all related just to fill, but there were other things included. We wanted to update the design criteria and again, some of the modeling requirements for submittal. Update and expanded on the watershed flow and conveyance requirements, and then clarify and expand upon the fill mitigation, detention requirements. Basically making sure it was very clear that detention is a separate entity from fill mitigation. Detention is for your drainage of water coming onto the site from rainfall. Fill mitigation is when you fill in the floodplain, you now got to compensate for that fill somewhere else. So those are the things we did. And again, we also did this case study watershed. The watershed we selected was the Bayou Conway Panama Canal. We selected that one because we already had an existing model developed pretty fully, and because we had heard that there was some development starting to go on more so in that watershed. But if you can see from the graphic up there, the pink area is the Bayou Conway Panama Canal watershed. It's very large. So we looked at, well, what if we did future development with 3 feet of fill? So we took, based on evaluating over time what we could see was been filled, took that and said, well, let's assume that rate of fill over time. I think it was 20 years we went into the future to determine this. And then also the difference with future development with no fill. Now, because Bayou Conway Panama Canal is so large and has a huge existing storage area already, unfortunately, when you put a fill limit in this basin, it doesn't have as big of an impact as one would think because of the extent of the storage that's already available. I would say probably over half of that basin is storage right now. So we said, well, okay, well that's not, that basin may not be reflective of all the other basins in the parish. So what if we had an additional, looked at just floodplain loss? What is the impact of just floodplain loss? So if you start losing significant amounts of floodplain, you do have significant increases in your water surface elevations. So based on those two things is why we came up with the 3 foot of fill max recommendation. So I'm going to expand a little bit on what Jerome just said, the different requirements. The first requirement is individual residential lots less than a ½ acre, not in a major or minor subdivision. Again, maximum of 3 feet of fill under the building foundation or within 2 feet, extend 2 feet beyond the building foundation. That is the limit per that requirement. Otherwise, if you go higher, theoretically you have to do a different type of construction, a pier and beam, chain wall, etc. That's what that section says. We recommend no change on that section. You said that section's fine, leave it alone. The next one was individual lots greater than a ½ acre, also not in a major or minor subdivision. It was very similar to the last one. 3 feet of fill to achieve your 1 foot above base flood elevation. Otherwise use pier and beam or chain wall construction, or in this case it allows additional fill higher or beyond the 2 feet extent from the building foundation, but that fill would need to be mitigated. And our recommendation on that one, we said just take out the part that says or mitigate additional fill. In other words, limit it to the 3 feet completely. The next section has to do with talks about residential lots greater than 3 feet of fill, major and minor subdivisions, and commercial development. This one basically says for residential lots, if they want to go over 3 foot of fill, and then any major, minor subdivision or commercial development, if you fill in the floodplain, you need to mitigate for that between the existing ground and base flood elevation. You cannot count the existing storage groundwater that is already taking up space when you try to dig. You cannot count that, so it has to be above natural groundwater. Or if you're having a lake, it has to be above that water level. You cannot count anything from the water level below in your fill mitigation requirement. So that was section 17-507B3. Then later on came section 17-507C1, which says all major minor subdivisions where a stormwater master plan is to be, meaning future, to design 3 foot of max fill where lots are to be placed. However, mitigation is still required. We understand that this came into play to account for areas where people were filling property without getting a permit and then coming back later and saying, now I'm going to submit my application for a subdivision. So it's trying to mitigate and ward off some of those issues. What we recommend is just put the 3 foot fill max with mitigation. That was the recommendation from HNTB. So again, residential lots overall, to summarize, residential lots changing from allowing over 3 feet of fill or 2 feet beyond the footprint of the building foundation, that limit it to just 3 feet only. No mitigation is required for those residential lots. Major minor subdivision, commercial development, cap at 3 feet with mitigation. So what this map shows is we developed a map and said, okay, so where and how does this apply? So the light blue shows 0 to 2 feet of base flood elevation. So in the light blue, to get your building at 1 foot above, that 0 to 2 feet, you need 3 feet of fill. That is the area in which you can meet the 3 feet of fill easily. The dark blue means you need more than 2 feet of fill. So to get your base flood elevation above that, you would have to do different type of construction. Chain wall, pier and beam, etc. So you can see that a large portion of the parish, now again, this is not the 3 foot of fill, this is 2 feet of fill because we're trying to meet that 1 foot of base flood. You still could go further, do 3 feet, but again, you have to change your building requirement. So then what I did, I said, well, it was suggested to try and put the zoning on there. And I know this is kind of difficult to see, but what this is generally showing is that lighter teal color to the right, that's all your conservation area anyway. That's your conservation district area. And this is what's current. So I know CPACs and Janet is here and they're re-looking at zoning and master planning, but this is what's current. The royal blue color, which is really more of your rural area. Your orange color on this map is more of your industrial. The darker green is intermediate residential. So we're kind of showing that most of the rural conservation district areas are the areas that are in this remaining floodplain, which is of concern. And that is what I have. Questions?
To kind of extend the discussion, Sean Chereau prepared the document that we submitted to you, and he's here to give a discussion on what other parishes are doing, right? So I'm going to ask Sean to come up. All right, thank you.
All right. Good evening, Councilman. The document I have prepared for you, it was, the good thing is both what Jerome has stated and Ms. Melissa Kennedy were all pretty consistent in how we're trying to summarize what you have in this document. As you all have seen over, I guess, the past year or two, there are many parts and pieces to the drainage ordinance that we can all dive into between design criteria and storms and outflow pipes and all that. This document here is just try to keep our focus tonight just on two basic questions. are other parishes telling you how high you're limited, how much you fill? And how are other parishes, do they even have a fill mitigation requirement? So I tried to, through all this stuff and ordinances and all that discussion, try to boil it down to these two simple questions and then sort of put them in categories based on Ascension Parish's ordinances drafted. And so just to summarize, well, I probably won't go back summarize too much, but Ascension Parish, as stated in current rules, there's really three types of categories. Those lots that are less than a half an acre, but they're not in a subdivision. Lots that are greater than a half an acre, and those that are minor subdivisions, major subdivisions, and all commercial. For, as stated below, less than a half an acre, your current rules state you can't go greater than 3 foot. And you gotta stay away from the property lines. You know, can't get within 10 foot, and you have to stay within your building footprint. If it's greater than a half an acre, it's that same concept. Stay away 10 foot from your property lines, stay on your building footprint. Don't do anything greater than 3 foot. But if you do, we're gonna sort of treat you like a subdivision. You gotta start mitigating that excess fill, that bigger backyard, the shed, if you want to put your driveway up 3 foot and it's supposed to, you got to start mitigating. That's an existing rule. And as we're all familiar with, subdivisions, minor, and I even joke, even a small snowball stand. There's no limitation how small you are. If you place fill in a flood zone, those small projects, you have to mitigate it. That is Ascension Parish's current rules. Now, if we were to look at East Baton Rouge, City of Central, City of Zachary, they do not have any limitations on how you can fill. They have some variations to the rules. They give you sort of, I call you some freebie amount of fill, as long as you stay under the building footprints of your house and allow you little transitions from your driveways. Subdivisions, minor subdivision commercial projects, there's no limitation on how high you can fill, but all fill must be mitigated. Their fill mitigation ordinance is pretty much exactly spot on, the same as Ascension Parish. I think Ascension sort of copied what EBR was doing for such a long time. Livingston Parish, I know they just recently, you might have heard they changed their rules, but they didn't do anything with fill mitigation. There's no limitation on how you can fill Livingston Parish. They do not require fill mitigation. You can build a subdivision, you probably see a pond there, but that's for detention purposes. There's no design component regarding fill mitigation. Iberville Parish, same thing. No limitations on how you can go. They do not require fill mitigation at all on their projects. Calcasieu Parish is not even the same watershed. Sometimes it's like a look somewhere off to the other side of the state. They don't have any limitations unless you start, they have V zones, sort of dealing with some tidal waves and some moving water. But pretty much, they don't have any limitation on how you can fill, but they just recently passed a drainage ordinance in the past year that we helped them on. They do have fill mitigation requirements. They just added that in the past year. And they have some minor tweaks. You don't have to mitigate 90% how much you fill in the flood zone. And St. Tammany Parish, that's a good parish to look at. That's some very good ordinances. The tough part about their ordinance was trying to break it down to these little small, simple buckets that we have. Basically, they have different fill height requirements based on where you at in the parish. So if they found an area that has historical flooding, or if it's in the flood zone, they pretty much will cap you at different elevations. Say it's no more than 1 foot or no more than 2 foot, unless you provide what they call a development plan, which means it's probably engineering drawings showing that, hey, I want to do a little bit more, but this is my game plan. I'm going to do this on my site. I'm not in the way of water, as Ms. Kennedy showed us earlier, that sometimes you can do fill the right way, but if you put in the wrong spot, it can block some flow. And for subdivisions, there's no limitation on how you can fill, but it all must be mitigated. So they're very similar to Ascension Parish and East Baton Rouge Parish. Try to run through that quickly there. I didn't know if you have any questions or need some clarifications.
We
if I may
will
have
call you
misspoke.
back. We won't listen to everyone, and then we'll call you back.
Okay, all right,
So, I'm pretty sure we're gonna have questions.
all right. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that's pretty much the end of our presentation, formal presentation. Janet Thorpe's here to answer any questions from a planning-related standpoint, but we'll open it up to questions right now from you, unless you want to have we're finished with our presentation.
Ms. Janice, can she be recognized so if we address the question? All right, she in the audience, so you do have someone for, our master land use plan, please. Okay, I'm open the floor up for any questions. Who wants to start? No, not that. Item 7. Yeah.
I got a
You
quick
got,
question.
okay. Doc?
Unless, Doc, you want to go first, go ahead.
Thank you, Randy. I'll be the guinea pig tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Jerome, thank you. Mr. Sherrill, thank you. Thank you, Melissa, and even the CPEX representative who hasn't spoke tonight, I guess. This is going to be difficult for me to say, but I'm going to say it. I've never been shy before. May of 2017, I ramble because I should have done a prepared statement. That's about 2 years ago, coming up this May, right? As chairman of the Strategic Planning Committee, I took up this issue of drainage impact studies on the heels of having traffic impact studies hijacked from my committee. A lot of people don't know it, but this was hijacked as well. It just didn't make the newspapers. How did that happen? Well, quite frankly, the administration, I'll just leave names out of it, blocked, okay, strategic planning's effort to look at DIS, drainage impact studies. I even have emails behind the scenes. I'm not going to read them into the record tonight. They would just serve to make the problem worse. It said that it was not the scope, just like transportation need to go to transportation. Doc, what the heck are you doing trying to study drainage? That should go to the EA Drainage Commission, which it did. And it's language there. There's an article today, local online newspaper, for 20 months. In the interim, 845 lots, it says, have been approved under the old law. Now, I was patient. I was told it was inside the scope. I was even sent in these blocking emails from the administration the scope of HNTB's study. Nowhere in that scope did I see anything to do with drainage impact studies. I did see floodplain management. I argued the point, as always, well, not always anymore, but back then, most times I lost the war, or at least the battle. The war, ladies and gentlemen, is still raging, at least on drainage. So HNTB was paid a healthy sum of money. I can't parse it all into the various packages. The paper this morning reported, not me, about $5 million total. And the EA Drainage Commission in August of 2018, that's just this past August, coming up on it, it was on the agenda, and it was pulled. We were told by the chairman, best I looked at that film to be sure before coming here tonight. We didn't want to have any laws. You'd say maybe this is understandable, that might cause problems because we're building a courthouse. I wondered back then, what kind of laws could we have that would affect the courthouse that we wouldn't want it to affect the courthouse to keep it from flooding just like everyone else? But nonetheless, it wasn't heard. Time marched on, 3 or 4 more months. We're now into August of 2018. EA Drainage Commission had it on their agenda again. It was pulled a second time. This time pending, we were told, that some grad students at Louisiana doing their coastal sustainability studies, whatever, are going to take a look at this. I complained vigorously, at least behind the scenes, to the chairman at the time, not the new chairman, saying that, look, this is not going to be good because this is a lose-lose situation now. Suppose these gentlemen, and I don't have anything against grad students. I was one once, well, twice, on a master's and a PhD degree. I felt pretty good about myself then, and it was the training necessary to get my PhD degree. But suppose they just, playing the devil's advocate, came out with recommendations different than HNTB. Now what do? We paid all this millions of dollars for a professional engineering company to advise us. And some grad students at LSU come out and say, oh, we don't agree with that. We think you should do that. What do we follow? And what do we tell our citizens? That's always the thing for me. Are we following these non-paid graduate students at LSU? And again, I don't want to make light of that, but so that's where we are today. Again, 845 lots later. One more thing. I have appreciation that CSRS was allowed to speak tonight. My emails would reflect I asked for the same thing. Back then it wasn't Mr. Sherrill, it was Mr. Donald Sanjay. And I was told it'd be a conflict of interest for him to testify in front of my committee because he was ERA and da-da-da-da-da. Again, I should have brought the emails. But somehow tonight, how ironic, appears to be no conflict of interest. But that's okay, let's move on. At least from what's presented so far tonight, I don't know where this is going to go. I do have a few questions. Why should we allow any fill whatsoever in areas where it's not necessary to raise the land to meet the basal flood elevation criteria, which is like most of the land in District 4, probably a similar situation for D7, Mr. Lawler's borough, D8, Miss Castle, where she holds court. Shouldn't we just use pier and beam to eliminate flooding of our neighbors? Anybody can answer that question for me?
Well, yeah, Doc, who you want to address that to, Doc?
Oh, I don't know.
The engineer?
Mr. Chairman, you make the choice.
Yeah, so it'd be,
I would,
Miss,
I would ask Melissa to come up
Okay.
possibly and answer
That's
that.
what-
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Probably not, Melissa, but I'll try. Why should we allow fill in areas where it is not necessary to raise the land to meet the basal flood elevation criteria, like could be found in my district and surrounding districts? Should we just use piers and beams to eliminate flooding of my friends and neighbors?
Well, that is,
And the second part of the question, I didn't get into the record, excuse me, Jerome, and maybe she's not appropriate to answer this. FEMA recommends no fill. Bill Rue, our quote, expert drainage engineer until he retired, said after the great flood of 2016 in August, everybody knows that, I'm going to identify the floodplains in Ascension Parish. We're still waiting from that. That's 3 years ago now. And I promised this council I'm going to bring back, he said this in public, a no-fill recommendation. So why is fill required even in our districts, number one, and where it's, if you look on Google and you look up Prairieville, essentially the 70769 zip code, you're going to see, when it defines how we got our name with all the beautiful prairies and everything that you would see when you rode down Old Jefferson Highway off 73, of course no more with all the housing, it says that we're 23 feet above sea level. And as I've said in public before, I've sat at this desk on this committee, on SPC, on the EA Drainage Committee, on the full council meetings, and never had nothing to say for about 6 years, well, 6 years in 2016, until finally, even at 23 feet, didn't protect us up in Prairieville, and will no longer protect us, in my opinion.
that was a lot.
Okay.
I want
It's
to
always
address
a
the
lot,
sea level
Melissa.
one. The sea level one, where you are in the country, you could be way high above sea level and still be impacted by floods because you have rivers up at those elevations too.
Correct.
So there's, those closer to sea level obviously are more
But
impacted
that
by
impacts
surge.
my first question. We're above sea level by 23 feet. And in the shaded areas, it kind of, sorry, I really couldn't read your map. And that's another thing. I sure wish we'd have had this information ahead of time so I could prepare the study. And this ain't a slam of our chairman.
well, Doc, I'm gonna just let you
I'm
know,
pretty sure
based
that-
on your chairman, I can tell you this here. Administration went out their way to get this information as fast as they can, because you can remember.
Well, that
This meeting
mistake
wasn't
was
supposed to be
probably-
held to the end of the month.
Right, the mistake
But-
was probably made that we even meeting tonight. Right off the bat, I'm almost willing to make a motion to defer because I don't see how we could settle anything. I just haven't even had a chance to study this. But again, it's illustrative of what you presented, that we're high up and yet we're still saying we can allow fill here. I just don't get it. So answer that one first and then tell me why FEMA says no fill.
Well, if you're out of the floodplain, you don't have necessarily an issue.
But you're still allowed to do something in our code, even with your
Yeah.
recommendations.
Yes, yes.
So is that wise?
To allow fill when you're not in the floodplain?
No,
Yes.
I'm not sure what we're communicating, but they're saying yes.
I think that's what you were asking. I'm
Yeah,
not-
Doc.
That's the second part. That's the
Yeah.
FEMA part. We're not in the
FEMA
floodplain.
doesn't regulate anything out of the floodplain,
Right, am
so
I in the floodplain in District 4?
there are areas in that area, yes, that are in the
Very,
floodplain.
very few.
There are some. Muddy Creek has a floodplain, part of Bayou Manchac has a floodplain.
Right, well, if you live on the river, we learned that, on the bayou, yeah, you're gonna, probably
Yes.
should have, and I tell all my people, I don't know, it's another thing, why did we try to help them by reducing the criteria necessary to call it a total loss?
were we helping them after the great flood of 2016, or were we hurting them? I said it back then, because what you've done is set them up for what Mr. Garrett Graves said, standing right where you are, Melissa, a couple months ago. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when we're going to flood again. And when we do, we didn't say you had to go up pier and beam. We didn't say you had to bug out and have your house bulldozed. We said just build it right back down in the ground. How many more times are we going to exhibit Albert Einstein's definition of insanity? Repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Okay, Don, I understand, but look, we're just trying to get the,
Right.
answer the question on field.
Please.
If we go to Great Flood, we go to all this here, but tonight discussion is about field. And you asked the question, once again, if you live in District 4 above sea level, should they have zero field or they should have field?
It depends on if you're in the floodplain or not.
Thank
So
you.
in the floodplain, you're saying you'd still recommend 3 feet of fill?
That's our general
With
recommendation.
mitigation, which is the
As long
current
as you have,
code.
yes, as long as you're mitigating it for, there are ways to do this. When
Which is
you-
the current code, at least says it would affect District 4. Or actually, the
I
whole
don't know
parish.
the details of District 4 specifically.
Well,
I know you
the
do
whole
have
parish. It would
floodplain.
affect the whole parish. That's what's in
It
the
does
code right
affect the
now.
whole parish.
That
When-
was part of your presentation, well, it's part of Mr. Sherrill's presentation. I'm looking at it.
When you get down into the lower areas of the parish and where the BFE between ground and the BFE is a lot higher, it becomes much more difficult to even mitigate for fill there because of the difference in that elevation. Because you can't get the mitigation that is required because you have such high groundwater. So if you're filling in that area, if you're filling 5 feet, you dig a foot and you're already hitting groundwater. So you're automatically expanding the area that you need to mitigate for that fill. Up in your area, you have more, it's not as high. It's not as big as a difference between, in the floodplain, between the ground and the base flood elevation.
Right.
So there are ways to do that, to mitigate the fill. And again, our requirements, or our edits included not just fill, but how you mitigate that fill. Requirements on the submittal and where you are in terms of conveyance and making sure you're not impacting conveyance. Your whole ordinance is the whole thing is about not impacting upstream and downstream impacts. You don't impact your neighbors. That's the whole point.
So let me ask you this. So suppose someone in my district, and they want to live at the back of the subdivisions, Manchac Crossing, Magnolia Estates, St. Andrews, Bell Grove, Perkins Oaks, all back up to Bayou Manchac. We're going to have nothing in our ordinance that would require them to build on pier and beam? I could see one of my constituents sitting in the
You
audience right
do
now,
have
his house
ordinances that require that already, depending on the level, you are need to get above that base flood
So
elevation.
with your remedy right now, which is basically, that's not changing. That's what we have in there.
That is correct.
Anybody that builds new right now would not be allowed to build next to these people that flooded on the ground.
No, I'm not
No.
saying that.
Okay,
No.
what are you saying?
It depends on what the elevation is between the ground and the base flood elevation. If you've only got 1 foot, you can fill that 1 foot and put your house up, or up to 2 feet. You can fill up to 2 feet. If you need to be 1 foot above the BFE and it only takes 1 foot to get to the BFE, you can fill 2 feet. If you're 4 feet between the ground and your BFE, you can only build to 3 feet and the rest has to be mitigated by chain wall, pier and beam, et cetera. So it depends on what elevation and what the depth is between ground and the base flood elevation.
But would it cover them against another great flood of 2016, or are we to conclude this act of God will never happen again?
No, I would never say that this act of God could never happen again, and I cannot say that if that happens again, that some of the people that follow the rules wouldn't be flooded.
Okay. We're going to have second rounds, or we're just going to go right to
No,
it?
no, you have a second round, Don.
All right, I'm going to stop there and give some of the other councilmen a chance, and thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Please don't think that my comments are in any way directed strongly or otherwise toward you or HNTB.
No,
okay?
I just want to make sure I'm able
Right.
to
I
articulate.
think you've done a fine job. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Kluwer.
Yeah, Melissa, if you don't mind, you can stay. Thank you very much. I'm gonna just do a brief recap on, what Doc's talking about is that I don't know about 23 feet, but historically Prairieville's higher than String Bridge Road and Santamon, okay? So, you know, I guess this question is a question for everybody, is why, you know, why are we building up in all those subdivisions over the years, you know? And when they're clearly above the flood stage and flood above the BFE. And I don't know them personally, each subdivision myself, so, but I think that's what he was trying to get at. And so based on the study that everybody did, and my notes on yours, what I've had issue with and confronted the administration and planning and zoning and everything, and I think yourself, you know, through conversations, is the people that fill and don't build, okay? All right, you know, when we go back to the single owner or the minor subdivision or family petition, where, you know, a half acre or less, you know, you got 3 feet. More than that, then they can mitigate and build higher. We have areas where somebody built up 20 acres, okay?
Yes.
All right? And to the best of my knowledge, and I brought it, Mr. Rue was still here when I brought it forward and tried to push and tried to get some things done and went to legal and everything else, is that they have no permits, okay? And that parish won't see them until they go for a homeowner's permit to build a house.
That's correct.
And Jerome, you might want to chime in on that if I'm getting off course there, but, you know, that's one we've been fighting for years.
That is correct, what you described.
And that was actually before the flood of 2016.
Yeah.
That we're trying to address that, and that came to us based on what the effect it's done on its neighbors.
Right. So what you're saying is accurate, Councilmember Kluat, is that the parish right now doesn't issue a permit to put fill on property, all right? So a property owner over the course of years might have a dump truck full of dirt, you know, 1 year, and the next year but 3 or 4, and eventually over 5 or 10 years, they may have built up the property to, you know, 5 or 6 or 8 feet, whatever the elevation is. Yeah. Right, and we don't know that until we have a building permit that's been requested on that property, and they have to we issue, you know, a elevation certificate for the property. They have to, we don't issue it actually. It's required to get your building permit, all right? So at that point in time, we'll find out that they've had they put an enormous amount of fill on the property, all right? So it's not until that point that we actually understand that, or we discover that, all right? So we don't have a permit system for fill. That's something that the council may look at, all right? So currently we don't, right? So I hope that answers your question.
I mean, I just think that's one of the things that goes on.
Yeah.
Okay?
It does. Absolutely.
And I brought it and, you know, been challenged with it and tried to help the landowners around that place. And was told, well, somebody needs to call the Corps of Engineers because, you know, some of it might have been wetland that they filled in. Well, that was done.
Right.
And there's nothing really done about that. So.
Right. Now, wetlands are a totally different issue.
Yeah, I know that. I'm good, but thank you.
Okay.
But also, you're saying that when they come for a permit to build a house, then they need an elevation certificate.
Correct.
Well, that elevation certificate that somebody goes out and shoot is going to be the level of whatever the ground is right then.
Well,
it's not going to be what the level of the ground was 5 years ago.
Well, they have to, on the elevation certificate, they have to indicate what the ground level is, the adjacent ground is, and what the level of the pad is, right, on that elevation certificate. Those two items are indicated.
And that brings me to my point that this, on the above, over a half acre, they can do more if they mitigate.
That's correct.
So if I want to build a house, say, you know, 50 by 50, just throwing a number out there, and I got 20 acres, then I can build it to the moon and fill. I can fill 20 acres up to build a house.
You conceive of it.
Tell me that.
Right.
Tell me it ain't true, and I'll show you where it is.
Well, because you can't get through mitigation, you won't have room for your mitigation.
Yeah.
If they follow the ordinance and they have to mitigate for it, you now have no room to do that.
But the fact that all this is done by a landowner prior,
Can't do nothing.
throws it out the window.
It becomes a civil matter at that point.
Yes.
Well, you also have to prove that they did it.
Yeah. Yeah, you got a lot of proving to do. I'm with you, Doc. So how enforceable is our, 3 foot under a half acre and more than 3 feet if it's over a half acre and the mitigate the difference? How's that working? How's that working for you?
Well, when they come in for a building permit, and if they're less than a half acre in size and they've built over 3 or 4, have over 3 feet of fill, we will require them to remove some of the fill in order to get to 3 feet. That's how we're operating right now. Obviously, we've had challenges to that, and, we kind of work within our code, within the legal system and everything else to see if we can get them to comply with the ordinance. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
All right, so one of the questions we had, what other parishes do, and we see that there's a decent amount of parishes around us that don't have a fill ordinance, a fill limitation.
Right.
Okay? They have some way to work around it, maybe a few, but, I had another question, Jerome, I think you answered today. We were talking about we're talking about where we do freeboard 1 foot.
Right.
Like where I'm at, it's 8, so you gotta build a 9.
Right.
And that during the rebuild stages after the flood of 2016, there's some of the federal programs, because they were administered by HUD, had a 2 foot
Right,
freeboard.
right,
A 10-foot elevation was needed
right,
for people to be eligible to participate in the programs. And then they later relaxed that based on funding availability back to the 9, which brought in a lot more people, because we had a lot of people that had been building at the 9 since that ordinance has been here for a long time.
right.
The detention ponds, that's, you had the good illustration you had, Melissa, of, you dig, and you build. That's come up at every time we ever talked about a subdivision, okay? Because we have cases where the ponds are there, and according to the engineering, and I think it was Mr. Sanji that set up in here one night and went through it extensively, that the math works for them, okay? It just, when we talking about building up in rural areas where the sheet flow, where you interrupt the sheet flow based on your little slide, your little film that you had, it shows how the normal sheet flow runs here, and you built up there, so it's got to go around it. And we know that, I don't know how well the engineering is done to understand the interruption of the sheet flow and the floodplain, the natural floodplain, and how much of that is actually engineered, calculated, taken into effect what it does to the floodplain, not just mitigating the acreage that they're fooling with. I just believe that there's a lot of misconception there, and there's a lot of it that in reality we see that when you build up land that you do interrupt sheet flow, and it's got to do something else, and it doesn't do it efficiently. Wherever the erosion is, wherever the natural drainage is, the slopes, the canals, they're there for a reason. They've been doing that for a long time. That's why when we come to moving a canal or moving a ditch or something, that it takes a lot of thought that goes into that. So I'm not all up on what the ponds do to even though I believe in engineering and fact and science. I just live in the real world, that the mitigation is not always true.
And you can't just fill here and go dig a hole here and think it's gonna work. There is, like you said, it has to be, make sure that fill area or that where you're mitigating, you have to tie it in. It's gotta be tied into the water course too. Because most of your area is backwater. flooding. So you gotta make sure that that pond is able to take that backwater flooding and fill like it would have filled in that property prior to you actually putting the material on the site. So it's not just fill here, dig a hole here. There has to be some design to it.
Well, that's some of the biggest heartburn with the constituents out there, is they just keep passing by and seeing a full pond, okay? And of course, it may be 20 feet deep because they needed the dirt, and they only need 2 foot of it to actually mitigate.
Right.
So we understand that. Some of the other questions we had, that, you know, I guess the resolution in front of us tonight was basically for in flood zones A, AE only, parish-wide. Is that correct?
That's correct. I think that it reads that you're allowed development in the X zone, which basically what you're saying is accurate. You know, so if you look at the reverse of it, it would limit fill in the A and the AE zone.
Well, so in other words, everybody in the other zones, the X and all, they can continue doing what they want to do.
That's correct.
And there's no other gonna take a look at what that does to the people in the A and the AEs.
Yeah. The way I understand the ordinance as it's written right now is that it would exclude those properties in the X zone. They could move forward as they need, as they see fit. It would put restrictions on properties in the A and the AE zone. That's the way I understand the ordinance as it's written right now.
So what's the intent of the reason for the agenda item tonight, Mr. Chairman? We talking about the intent is in all A and AE for everything, including the commercial, major, minor? I mean, because Jerome, I mean, I know how it reads, I got it in front of me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I only have the title of the ordinance in front of me, which is to impose temporary restriction on placement of fill for major and minor subdivisions. Right. So, to understand this properly, a minor subdivision includes
Family petition.
any division of property, and that includes family petitions, and it includes, just simple subdivisions.
Simple
Simple
subdivisions.
divisions, right.
That's, I just wanted to make that
Yeah,
clear.
'cause those are subsets of a minor subdivision.
Sir?
Includes individual lots, per se?
It does not
And
include
includes
individual
individual
lots.
It does not.
Does
That's
not.
my understanding, yes.
Because that was Bill Dawson's concern.
Right.
Well, that
If
is,
there's an individual lot that's already been subdivided, that property exists, they can move forward, right? As the way I read this. Now, I think we're still under item number 6.
yeah.
Yeah,
We're-
so that would get to item number 7. on
Right.
the
Yeah.
agenda.
And I would just
Yeah,
make sure Mr. Cluett
I'll
knows,
back up a little bit, Doc.
when that item comes up, I'm pretty sure you're gonna have a lot to say, Mr. Cluett.
All right. Are we looking at a 100-year flood zone? A
Study.
100-year flood,
Well,
Study.
the A and the AE zones indicate 100-year flood zone
Okay.
areas, right?
and I just want, you and I talked today, and I just want to bring it up, that even right after the flood that they were talking when we was trying to help everybody out and things, and with, National Flood Insurance Program, is that we talked about, possibly FEMA wanting to raise, the flood zones, raise,
BFE.
the BFEs and everything, and take another look at it. That hadn't been done yet.
Not to my knowledge. Remember, FEMA just basically makes a recommendation that you have to meet you have to adopt an ordinance.
You have to adopt an ordinance.
That recommends. We adopted 1 foot over BFE in order to get extra points for our flood insurance program. Some areas and some jurisdictions have 0, all right?
Yeah.
They don't have a limitation. We went to 1 foot because we got extra points for our flood insurance program, and it gave our property owners better rates, all right? So that was the reason for that.
Yeah. And Melissa, your presentation on the, probably the most infinite study y'all done was based on the Panama Conway Basin.
Correct.
You know, there was a great deal of time and resources put toward that study. And so I guess meeting with you guys, that we have no way to correlate that with the other basins, the Lower New River Basin or whatever.
No. That's the intent of the overall floodplain management plan, is to get into that and start evaluating in those other watersheds.
I'm gonna reserve from that.
All right. I'm pretty sure it's gonna be a long discussion, Mr. Kua. Todd?
Yeah, Melissa, I guess it was about a year back when we had a public hearing, when we started.
May of 2018.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what we have in front of us tonight, you know, what you're speaking of came out of the meetings and what y'all put together and hadn't changed since, pretty much.
Correct.
Yeah. And I guess the reason we're here tonight is because at the last council meeting, we had an ordinance come in front of us that wanted to do a moratorium for 6 months, and I think a few of us was in opposition of, you know, doing so, and we want to look at this and maybe move forward with what's on the table now here tonight, and get this moving, because it's been delayed several times. And I'm all for moving forward with it. And I'm really not for a moratorium. I'd rather move forward with the ordinance and get, you know, be as fair as we can to the public, you know, as far as the 3 feet, and try to protect some areas, you know. And like Randy said, I had somebody in my district that actually filled up, maybe, might have been 20 acres, but it was acreage. And it had to go, it was when I first took office years ago, and they had to go to a civil. And the neighbor that got affected by it did win in court, and the guy had to dig a big old large ditch on his property line, and all the dirt that he got put on the neighbor's property to spread out to
Well, I
help.
might have been fudging by 2 acres.
Yeah.
So, I apologize.
But it does become a civil matter, unfortunately, you know, and that's why we're trying to put ordinance in places where this can be protected, and the parish can protect the, you know, citizens of this parish, you know. So, you know, I know there might be some things that we can critique down the road, you know, if we have to come back and amend this ordinance. But as of right now, I'd rather do that before we put a moratorium on because there's a lot of people right now that's plan on building shortly, individual homes or subdivisions. That's all I got for now.
Just quickly, right now it's BFE plus 1 foot
That's correct.
parish wide.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit intrigued with St. Tammany Parish, how they created critical areas and other, I guess they did it in zones or areas of St. Tammany Parish, where they,
If we get Sean.
Sean, yeah,
Yeah.
where they, you know, fill limitations range from 0 to 24 inches. Has that been looked at, Melissa or Sean?
No, we did not look at that, no.
Okay. Because, I mean, like Doc says, we're 23 feet above sea level in one area of the parish, and we're at sea level or below in
Correct.
others. So I'm wondering whether that would be a common sense approach.
And it could be, and like I said, we haven't really gotten into the details of the floodplain management plan, and that was the intent, to evaluate each of the watersheds. And there may be different requirements depending on where you are in the parish, or that would be what we would recommend. We haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
Yeah, that was just a quick preparation for the meeting, but it appeared that the concept of St. Tammany is just to define something as a critical area, as just a place that has potential or has flooded a lot historically. So that allows the opportunity, if we have some of those older subdivisions or an older developed watershed, that we just say they're very sensitive to flooding. We're going to define that as a critical area, and then you can impose this, stricter requirements. Some of them, then they added, is like historical flooding was one thing that allowed something to be in a critical area. Another item was if it's in the 100-year flood zone, we gonna call it a critical area, and a couple other things. So it felt like that allowed the opportunity for a drainage board or you know, the drainage works departments and saying, due to certain parameters, we would like to add this particular area to the critical zone area, so anyone that develops this in the future, they have a little stricter requirements. allows for that flexibility. So if there's a wish from you all to dive into that a little more often, but that was just a quick review, and that's how they define. And they have a map that's posted at their website. We call this the critical area. You look it up, and you have your own project-specific requirements.
Okay, because like after the flood of 2016, we're all kind of shell-shocked. And I think the council, the administration, Jerome, we were all looking for relief. Is that right, Jerome? And I think that helped us, and it helped our citizens quite a bit.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
I said, after the flood of 2016, we were kind of all in shock.
Well, we
And-
were, yeah. And
we-
that wasn't
We took
an anomaly.
measures at that time to try to help citizens with insurance
Right.
premiums and whatever we could do.
Right.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's all for now.
That's all you have. All right.
Yep.
Doc, you
I
want-
have a follow-up to his
All right.
question, if you don't mind. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's important for the record to put in here what Mr. Sherrill found in comparison to St. Tammany. I live in St. Tammany, and I'm in one of these, as he calls them, quote-unquote, critical areas.
Doc, you don't live in St. Tammany now.
You better not.
All right,
Oops.
I do on weekends.
Well, you have a home in St. Tammany.
Okay.
Do you live here?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to live there.
Somebody's digging a hole.
I pay taxes in both places, but my homestead exemption is right here in good old Ascension Parish, Perryville. Does that help? All right. If I was rudely interrupted, here's what I want to do. I want the record to show that subdivisions, minor subdivisions, commercial projects, there are two parts to it. They read, there are no limitations on how high you can fill, and all fill must be mitigated. That's both for AP and St. Tammany. Now, individual lots, not in the subdivision, in these critical areas, okay, is quite different, and that's what Mr. Cagnolati was alluding to, and that's what I was trying to do, but I didn't do as good a job as he did when I was asking you earlier, Melissa. In Ascension Parish, I won't go back over it, there are three criteria, depending on whether it's a half acre, a full acre, throw salt over your left shoulder or not, but in St. Tammany, it says, quote, there are different field requirements based on the location of the lot within different categories of drainage areas, which is what I'd like to see done here. And then I wouldn't have to go live in St. Tammany. For example, there are locations classified in St. Tammany as, quote, critical areas, there's that word, that limit fill. Fill limitations range from 0, no fill, 0 to 24 inches. Again, I have a constituent sit out in the audience. I'm surprised he hasn't jumped to fill up a card yet. It flooded because he lived on the banks of, or not exactly on the banks, but very close to Bayou Manchac. That is a critical area because every subdivision in my district, I'm fighting for D4 here, and I realize it's a unique case, okay, that backed up the back of those subdivisions to Bayou Manchac flooded. St. Andrews, again, Perkins Oaks, Bell Grove, Manchac Crossing, Manchac Plantation, Magnolia Estates. And I'd like to see us look into it, if that's what we're concluding tonight. And we're probably headed toward another conclusion that I doubt we're going to be able to pass this out of committee tonight because I think it's a rush to judgment. Because we might have to actually study some more, and I know a lot of people are going to hate that. I know we study too much as it is, et cetera. But Mr. Cagnolati just, came up with a real valid point, and it vexes me. Okay. Now, one more thing. Mr. Chairman, while I have the.
You got the floor right now, Doc.
Point of order. I noticed Mr., let me phrase this absolutely correct. Mr. Lawler is sitting to my right up here. The head count would show 6 members of this committee. Mr. O'Neill Parrington recently warned us in the antechambers to be real careful not to text message with any of the other council matter, et cetera. So if he's about to testify before he does, it would be my opinion, we'll have to let legal decide that I want to hear what he has to say. Let me start there. Definitely want to hear what he has to say. After all, this is his ordinance, the full council, but maybe he needs to be where Jerome, you is standing and speaking as a citizen as opposed to a councilman.
He can speak, I mean, it's just he's not part of the committee to vote.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill.
So your advice to us is he can't motion, he can't vote, but he can speak.
Right.
So we're not breaking open meetings law by having 6 of us up
No, he's speaking
here.
openly. No, texting back and forth is what I was mentioning before.
And this is a
So
discussion.
that's different than him up here testifying about his ordinance.
Absolutely.
Okay. Just want to check with legal, and I stand corrected, and thank you.
Okay.
I assume we're going to hear from Mr. Lawler.
I know, Mr. Clough, I have another question, but Mr. Lawless, it's your chance to ask your question.
I just have a couple questions. First of all, the critical areas, you know, I've been under the impression that there's no single floodplain, whether it be for the state, the parish, the nation, that every area is different. And that's why St. Tammany has these critical different areas. Is that fair?
I'm not particularly, familiar with St. Tammany, but I do know that St. Tammany has another zone that we don't have, and it's called the V zone, and it means velocity, all right? And you'll see areas like Grand Isle, areas that have wave action, certain areas like that, that are flood prone, that are designated as a V. And I'm not sure what St. Tammany does, but I know that they do have that designation in certain parts of the parish, and it's very likely right near, the Wrigley's perhaps, and possibly along Lake Pontchartrain. I don't know
Yeah.
that, but
Do we have floodways in Ascension Parish?
we do.
We do.
Yes, and the newly designated FEMA maps that are to become effective in May, there are floodways that will be designated on those maps.
And based on this current ordinance that we have in front of us tonight, would we be allowing fill in the floodways?
Under the new rules that you will be adopting, hopefully Thursday, on the D ordinance that's up for consideration by the council, full council, they would very limit development in floodways, and they have to go through an extensive engineering process in order to develop in floodways.
But would we allow fill? Is there a potential that we would allow fill in floodway?
I don't think that you can, right? Under my current understanding of that ordinance, and I'd have to go back and read it. I don't know fully.
I just want to add, I would have to read it specifically too, but the reason for designating a floodway is that is the area where you're most likely to get your basic flow, so you don't want to impede your flow path by building in that floodway.
No, exactly, and that was my point, and I want to make sure that if we do any sort of fill ordinance, that we're not allowing fill to go into a floodway.
And I also want to clarify, it's just for the Bayou Conway Panama Canal Basin. That's the only one that we have a designated floodway in, or once this.
And would that be
Lomar is
because we haven't mapped the rest of the parish?
That's right.
Correct.
That's correct.
Exactly. So I mean, that raises a concern
spent a lot of
that we
time
could be
in
allowing
the
fill in
Panama
floodway.
Canal.
Right now, as we speak, we could be allowing fill in floodways. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, they're not designated as floodways.
Because we haven't mapped them out yet.
Correct.
But just because they're not designated doesn't mean they're not there.
Future floodways.
Is that correct?
Potentially
That's
future
correct.
floodways.
Yes.
I can guarantee you, when they do the whole parish, that within the New River Basin, they're gonna find at least one floodway.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's all the questions I have for right now.
Mr. Cluart, you,
I just, the critical areas that we don't have that listing, of course, but, for designating critical areas, that's somewhat what you're looking at is if you're not gonna do anything in A and AE. Different acronym, but that's what you're kind of saying, trying to deter. The floodways, and back to the floodways, a newer definition acronym that we're gonna have to deal with, that we hadn't been dealing with, that the whole thing behind identifying a floodway and the work that goes into it is to discourage any type of building or any type of movement to disturb that area.
Correct.
That when the water falls, that's where it's going, and that's where it's gonna be moving through.
Correct.
So, I mean, Melissa, I don't know how much y'all had to deal with floodways, in the past in different areas. Like I said, now that we've done the Panama Conway, at the request of Mr. Dawson, now that you established that a floodway in there, okay? So, we're using terms like critical areas. You'd have, like Doc said, you'd have to study it. You got some more studying to do.
Correct.
Because I don't think even in your best effort that you can make an interpretation on things right now.
No.
But I don't have a problem with the 3 feet. I think we just need to have some enforcement on it, and We've challenged the administration before, based on what I talked about earlier with a constituent that filled up 18 acres of land. Todd had some do the similar thing, things like that. It's not a subdivision that the plot was introduced, reviewed, stipulations approved by the department or the planning and zoning department, whoever. You know, this just people doing it. So, you know, I ain't saying that people are trying to hurt each other, but they do. So I still got a lot of people in my district that are trying to rebuild. I don't know pretty much anything you can do and not put any kind of dirt or something out, you know. But you know, I don't have a problem with the restrictions on the field. But I think that we got enough information in front of us. I don't know what this LSU study that we're waiting on is gonna bring to us. Supposedly the state is working on regional projects. That's the only thing that's gonna save us, somewhat save us from what happened in 2016 is regional projects. Comite diversion, dredging AME, allowing us to help people until we can do better, building Laurie's levee extension and things like that. Highway 22 cut. But everything we're looking at on your presentation, we definitely need to look at mitigation, and we need to look at that field and limit the field. So if nothing's changed from the, I think I had the dates when you first presented, and you know, giving it a year, whatever. I don't think it's prudent tonight to pass what we're looking at. I think but we need to mandate some quick action. And do you have any idea when the LSU studies? What's up with that? And I'm getting to number 7 or what?
No,
That's part of my question.
no,
Okay.
you good.
Yeah.
We was hoping they would be here tonight, but I don't.
Yeah, unfortunately, and I had a conversation with Dr. Clint Wilson, who's the LSU professor who's leading the program right before the meeting here. And we had a lengthy discussion about what we think that they'll provide and what they're likely to provide. And remember that this is a generalized study. It's for the entire Amite River Basin. It's not going to get specific in terms of you need to be at 2 feet, you need to be at 5 feet. That's not the purpose of the study, all right? Just to kind of look at kind of a generalized nature of what floodplain and fill is doing to the generalization of the flood basin, you know, the Amite Flood River Basin, all right?
So it may give us an idea, regional idea of what happens.
Very
with
likely,
fill.
yeah.
I mean, you know, just what, you know, not getting deep into the engineering, but I know a good bit about it. Is just if you do math and
Yeah.
on
Note
cubic
that
feet.
they have a series, it's basically a senior class project that they're doing, and they're having students work at this. And Dr. Wilson was particularly cognizant of the fact that he's not trying to take away any of the studies that the parish is already doing with our consultants. They're not here to supersede what the consultants are doing, all right? So it's very generalized in nature, all right?
We've invested so far into HMTB, so we need to get that.
Right.
I would like to see something, all the notes totalized, and the recommendation come in the ordinance form from the administration and whatever department it needs to come from.
Okay.
Come here with what the money we spent based on what we got and what your recommendations are. Don't ask a councilman if you need 1 foot, 2 foot, or 3 foot. All right? Thank you.
I'd say bring that, I'm with Randy, let's move forward with it. Put something on the table that we can vote on.
Okay, I just
whether it's ordinance form or, you know. But, like I said, we paid for it. Let's, bring it to us.
Mr., you have any more?
Not on this issue, really.
Okay, Don?
So this is just something we're discussing still? because
We
it's
still
next-
discussing, because I got some questions myself. I
So
want to
what
clarify
Mr.
some things for
Mr.
y'all.
Clark just said, he didn't make it in the form of a motion, I noticed, so we waiting to the next
I
item?
made
to-
no motion, sir.
No motion.
And you don't want one right now?
That's right.
Okay, then I have no further comment other than, let's see. I did have one more question. Oh, if it gets in the next, that we decide to defer to some body or ourselves and so forth because of whatever reasons, no one's still talked about critical areas, at least we've added that now. Here at Beam, we've talked about. Regional detention ponds. I've been asking Melissa from HNTB for a while now about that. And I believe we added it on, actually, in our drainage meeting as an amendment to a motion. I made the amendment, and that's the one that passed. So I would hope at the time when we do come back with whatever the recommendation is, and I fully concur with Mr. Kluot. Don't be asking no councilman or nothing. These are my recommendations, as well as a recommendation defensible by HNTB or whoever, okay, to whether regional detention ponds are indicated in our parish or not. Why or why not? Like, again, hate to keep talking about St. Tammany because y'all got me living there already, but,
No, you got yourself.
Twice.
let me say this, folks. I pay much too much property taxes in St. Tammany Parish to not be living there. And when the old chicken doctor finally decides to hang it up, may very well, I love this place, be a place where I'd move though, but not because their government's any better necessarily or anything. But I will tell you this, there's some real good fishing down there.
All right, Doc, we good. We know where you live at now, Doc.
What flood zone do you live in St.
I
Tammany?
live on a man-made canal that empties directly into Lake Pontchartrain, and I'm 14, 6 3/4 inches above
In the V zone, I'm pretty sure.
the ground in my home, my weekend home. And I will say this, it's not so bad living up on Pier and Beam.
I live there.
And I tell you this, if you think housing don't sell, try to buy a lot in my subdivision. You better be pulling out somewhere between
All right, Doc,
$7,000
let's stick to flood management. My question now, if you don't mind.
Go for
All
it.
right, we talk about LSU. Jerome, you straighten that was one of my biggest concerns. You straighten that. We also know that study won't help us none, really.
Really?
Jerome, based on this, we also talking about your BFE with the roads. How would that affect us? Can you go into that based on?
I'm going to let Sean Chiro answer that because it's really an engineering question and how the subdivisions are designed.
Okay,
So, yeah.
so,
All right, in a subdivision, the current ordinance requires that roads cannot be any lower than 1 foot below base flood elevation. So that's indirectly telling you how high you gotta go.
okay.
Okay, so, that's just the current ordinance. So when we're, also, the parish a long time ago, so if we want subdivisions, I guess aesthetics and other reasons, we wanted curb and gutter. We took away, like, open ditch is bad. If you have one, don't you ever come back with an open ditch subdivision. So it's all curb and gutter. So that, to have curb and gutter work, you need to drain over the curb in the front, drain over the back. So those have been the design standards. Return height need to fill up, and so the road only need, can't be more than 1 foot below. Most developers don't choose, if I have to build my road up at least 1 foot short, then I'm just gonna throw in another 3 foot of dirt, because that's a lot of money, just to keep filling up dirt unnecessarily. So, one thing to consider that if we're in a subdivision that's, I don't know, however your fill requirements are, I'm saying, we're not allowing you on your house pad to build any more than, I don't know, same mechanic rule, no more than 2 foot of fill in the whole subdivision, 3 foot below base elevation. And then you now told the road to go up a little higher. And they were also saying we want curb and gutter roadway. Those type of designs don't jive that well. So it may be allowing to encourage for that situation to work, maybe to relax some of those things and say maybe it's open ditch. We're back to open to that concept of an open ditch roadway. And then we also got to think about sanitary sewer. A lot of requirements, sanitary sewer manholes, it's a desire to have them at base flood elevation. If not, you have to start capping some of these things. The parish want their new treatment plants that we're asking for. We don't want these things the first thing to get flooded when an event happens, all that stuff mixed on our mechanical, on the mechanical devices. So there's some new challenges to all this. It's one of those things, you make an ordinance change, you let your requirements and let the creativity of the engineers and the requirements and economics play yourself out. That just keep in mind later on down the road, you may be hearing some stuff. Can we relax the 1 foot rule? Can we go to no more than 2 foot low best elevation? We'll be having a whole nother meeting about what do other parishes do with that. Do we want to allow open ditches if the parish is never going to be maintaining the open ditches? Because that used to be a big maintenance problem. So there's a rippling effect, a couple little things, as you imagine when you're changing one little item, design requirement, without considering the other items. So I don't know if I answered your question or created more questions.
No, it was just that, that was one of the
But
questions
that-
I
yeah,
had to
you're right,
understand.
current ordinance. And there's also, keep in mind, DOTD routes, DOTD projects, they have DOTD codes requirements, how high you have to build those roads. DOTD routes are intended for commerce, moving people in and out in events, want those areas to be protected from floods. So they also have requirements regarding how low you're allowed to make a road in the base flood elevation.
Okay. All right, Melissa, if you don't mind coming back up. My understanding, HMTB only did what we call the lower, I guess, what they call the stream where y'all did.
Bayou Conway, Panama Canal.
Yeah, Panama Canal. You haven't done anything in the rest of the parish.
I wouldn't say we haven't done anything. We have modeled other areas of the parish, but we haven't done the detailed analysis like we did in Bayou Conway, Panama Canal. We did a lot more survey data on the structures, cross sections of the streams to get enough information to evaluate in more detail. So that still needs to be done on some of the other streams and watersheds. Some we have a decent amount of data, others we do not.
Okay. And as of right now, you are working with LSU. You are also is working with the state plan they are doing, and and you're also working with the Corps of Engineers on this regional study that they are doing. Correct?
We've been coordinating with the state and with the Corps of Engineers so that we're sharing data. We've shared survey data, we've shared model information. So there has been a definite exchange of information. We've obtained LIDAR data from the state. We've obtained LIDAR data from CPRA. So there's this sharing of information, and we have not coordinated yet with the LSU folks. That is on our agenda to do that, to meet with them and discuss what their plans are in terms of what they're going to be doing for this parish.
Okay. So I don't want to put you on the spot in this manner, but for our flood plan management program we currently right now, would you say we have a complete parish-wide flood management program?
No.
No.
And if you complete this study to do the whole parish with all that data, what is the estimated cost to finish this study so we can have the full picture that we would need?
It's approximately $2 million.
Okay, that's the question I want to hear. It's really about money. Right now, we currently have a half of a study, correct?
For the floodplain management plan, what we did is we developed an implementation plan which outlines all the tasks that need to be done and how much each of those tasks costs. This other part of doing the Bayou Conway Panama Canal was kind of an add-on to start looking into ordinances, et cetera. So that's where we've gotten to. We finished that implementation plan. That's where the $2 million comes from, and about an 18-month schedule.
Okay.
Melissa, would that also include recommendations for ordinances?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, there's no further question. I want to thank Jerome and everyone who came. No one had any question for CPAC? None.
Well,
Okay.
They'll address the next
I got a
item
quick
on the
question
agenda.
for Jerome, if you don't mind, sir.
Go ahead.
Okay, he had asked Melissa, what's the time and the cost to finish the parish-wide study? I'm gonna ask you, is it only HMTB working on this, or do we don't have any other engineering studies that can be compiled into this, and some of the
Yeah.
stuff we've done?
I don't know the answer to that, Councilman
Just a
Kalula.
question.
Yeah. Ken
Ken?
might have an answer to that.
It was my understanding that, Councilman, that it started from, coming from drainage, and we're looking at a field management type system, and HMTB was tasked to do it. And as Melissa said, when they got through with this kind of offshoot, for lack of a better word, when we start focusing on doing some things in the Panama Canal area, that, you know, they focused on that for a while. But I know they did say afterward that to do the detailed type of analysis that would answer the question on how much fill would be in these different floodways and in these different areas, that it would take additional studies. And she told you about what that cost would be tonight.
I just didn't know if we'd had other people that had worked on other parts of the parish and other studies, because I know HMTB has been on some pretty serious contracts through
Right.
drainage and
Yes,
through the administration,
yes.
okay? And, you know, it's all for everybody, so anything that was done within the drainage department can be used in, you know, in
Absolutely.
conjunction, okay?
Absolutely.
Or whomever else
Yeah.
did it, CSRS, whomever.
All right.
Thank you, man.
All right, Randy, you open the door. Doc got one question. Jerome, don't go nowhere. You got a question for administration. I'm sorry.
Mr.
Sorry.
Claude always stimulates my thinking. Our
try.
chairman just boldly announced that we should not wait anymore for LSU. I'd like to know how the administration, and I guess not just administration, does HNTB as well feel about waiting for LSU? Are they likely to find out anything at all that HNTB has not already considered and recommended, or may be considering further if we task them with more studies of critical areas, detention ponds, you know, the issue itself of how much fill, et cetera?
If I understand the question, you're asking if we tasked LSU to do that?
No, I mean, I think what they were doing, they're not here tonight, so forth, but our chairman just said that we don't need to wait for them anymore. Is that true? Y'all comfortable with that? I mean, you'll go on record tonight to say that I don't think we should wait either?
I'm not sure how to answer that, so.
There you go.
I mean, they're going to provide some
Mr.
information
Dawson,
to
do
the
you care
parents.
to address that?
Just basically what, Jerome just basically said that they have a task to do. It's a broad study. It's looking at a whole basin. There probably will be information in that we could utilize. But I don't want anyone to think that, and Jerome has talked about this a couple of times, that when you're delving down to actually telling you exactly what that field should be, that study is not going to do that in our opinion. It's a broader study.
So, without saying it, and not putting words in your mouth, we're wasting our time holding us back from EA drainage for LSU study.
I don't know that,
I didn't ask you, Mr. Claude, or Mr.
I don't
Mr.
think
Lambert, but I think they both said they agreed, and that's
We
a
just
rare
told you
moment.
that a
That's
while
why I'm
ago.
bringing it up, that my colleagues agree with me on things, but
I don't
I
know.
was shocked, I'll be honest with you, when we delayed it for that reason. Now, courthouse notwithstanding, but we need to get going.
Okay.
Well, I wasn't privy to the discussion about why the delay was to occur, and I never heard that we're being delayed because of the LSU study, so I'll leave that as it is, so,
That's it.
yeah.
All right. I'm going to close this question for item 6. And I just want to thank everyone for it. I don't know if I did that already, but Jerome, administration, CRS, HNTB, and CPEC for coming to this meeting. I really appreciate that. All right. Now, item number 6, guys, it was a discussion. Do we want to take any action on this or leave this as is and move to item 7? Comment period will be coming next. You will have your opportunity on field.
You have no cards on six.
Yeah, he does.
How many? 2?
Mr. Chairman.
Wait.
I know this was just for discussion, but do you want a motion to move forward on 6? Because it's just open for discussion.
That's it. I mean,
That's
that's
it.
up to
We
y'all.
done.
If y'all don't make them nothing, that's it. It's over with discussion.
But we, I would like administration to come to the table with with the ordinance form, like Randy said, and as quick as possible. Let's
So
bring it.
You just want to make a recommendation that
A recommendation.
administration come back to this committee or
Yep.
to strategic plan?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's here now, so
Yep.
we just come back to it
That's
and
it.
make it
Right.
legit.
Okay, do you want a time limit on that?
The next meeting.
Next meeting? Okay. We have a motion by Mr. Todd Lambert to request administration to come back with recommendation on the flood
HNTB plan.
flood management field plan, next meeting. Second by Mr. Kluat.
Question.
Question by Doc.
Mr. Lambert, does that include drainage impact study language as well, or just floodplain management plan?
I don't know if the HNTB had the the drainage study.
don't.
If it had it in there, we could bring parts of it.
Got recommendations, I've seen them.
I think-
Now,
So I don't know.
Need to
I don't
focus
know
on-
what they had.
if we're gonna stick with the topic here, I mean, I'm
well,
not,
frankly- frankly,
I
D-
want to deal with floodplain. The drainage issue, I'm being honest with you, I prefer that to go back
Back
to
to the
drainage,
drainage department. I agree.
you know.
Drainage.
So the motion is DIS.
Okay, why is Dad on the ride?
His motion was floodplain management, but you're saying it's really DIS. The language of the 3 foot and all that, that's in the Unified Land Development Code,
All right.
and that's
Not
drainage
DOA,
impact study.
DIS, okay?
Yeah.
I'm explaining to him, he misunderstood.
Yeah.
Impact study.
Drainage impact study.
Okay, well, now, I don't want to deal with drainage impact study.
You do or
I
don't?
Not with this committee, not with drainage impact study. That is drainage.
But
That's East St.
that's-
drainage.
that's
No, this
what-
is field mitigation. This is,
Phil is in our is not in our Unified Land Development Code
Yeah.
about Phil? Mr. Shiro, please.
Trying to help you out, it's getting late.
Yes.
All right, the fill limitations, how much you can fill, it is in the drainage ordinance.
Right.
Drainage ordinance, that applies to anybody placing, moving, shaping dirt, and the entire thing. Subdivision ordinance is a whole separate thing. That just, regardless of what you do, just has to refer back to what are the rules on the drainage ordinance. A drainage ordinance is very vague about what needs to be in a drainage impact study that we use the terms DIS, drainage impact study. That's a separate document. This tells you, really get down to the engineering technical details of how you want to show that you're satisfying the key big design requirements that you define in the drainage ordinance.
No, I'm really confused.
So your fill, your stuff regarding.
So what's in the Unified Land Development Code?
Unified Land Development Code has a chapter, at least chapter 5 of drainage, it's called the Drainage Ordinance. It's a section in there.
Right, so when.
It defines all the
In Ms.
drainage.
Melissa's presentation, was she not giving us sections of the code? Did
Yes,
they
I
make-
believe maybe 17 or something.
Okay, so they have made recommendations on DIS then?
No,
no?
not, no drainage impacts, no.
Is
She-
that true, Miss Melissa, is she going? Because that's the whole reason it was taken from our committee, is because they said that
what
the
that's all
scope.
we're doing right now.
Yeah, but the scope, they said, was for HNTB to look at both.
We looked at the drainage ordinance, and then there is a document called a drainage impact study policy.
Okay.
Which outlines the requirements for meeting that drainage ordinance. We had provided recommendations to those, to
That's,
that
now we're getting
document
there.
as
So
well.
that's not, that is or is not in the motion?
Separate document. Right?
And we just, whenever there's multiple parts in the drainage in the ordinance, there's detention, 25-year, 10-year, 100-year, freeboard elevations,
Right, correct.
HGL,
I've
there's
seen
a
all
lot of
that.
that stuff. Like a lot of tonight's discussion was the fill. You know, there's a section very specific, 2 foot of fill, 3 foot of fill. That's buried within the drainage ordinance itself. That's part of the code. It's not even mentioned in the current drainage impact study policy document.
So what is the motion?
Randy, you can go back.
Quick note, it's scary, Doc, but me and you kind of agreeing on a lot of stuff tonight. It's time to end this meeting, man. But anyway, I'm with Doc, okay? It's very confusing, okay? And hell, it's probably confusing for the administration to administer it, all right? So, to the best of my knowledge, Melissa, HMTB is working on both items. Am I right or wrong?
Correct.
Okay, so what Doc's asking and what we're asking for is bring a document back to us that covers it. We've made the mistakes in the past of passing an ordinance that has something written in it that didn't reflect itself back on another part of the code. We've had, codes without, our ordinances without code reflections. So that's what he's asking for. And I'm not gonna, Mr. Lambert, what he's asked for, but what Doc's asking for is the DIS, the Drainage Impact Study, and ordinances, as we're talking tonight, on field. So that all correlates. We've got to have some rules that just go across the board, whether it be in, through drainage, through that document, or whether it's, in subdivision code or building ordinances. Am I confusing you, Melissa?
No, it's just that the Drainage Impact Study policy document defines the criteria in order to meet the ordinance. So it's not necessarily part of the ordinance, but you want to follow that so that you're meeting the intent of the ordinance.
One's no good without the other. To a point.
I wouldn't recommend going, well, you could do just the ordinance, but I highly recommend going with the Drainage Impact Study policy revisions.
But that's
as
what
well.
we're asking for.
Yes.
That's what we're asking for. That's what Doc was asking for a while ago. So y'all the professionals, you're the consultants hired. This is what we're asking for.
And we're looking at
Tell
two
us what it
parts.
takes to get it.
And we did provide that back in May. So,
We'll pull it all together, and
All-
probably,
both.
if it's okay with this committee, we'll send information back and forth as we're moving forward. So we understand, we'll work toward it.
Any questions, get with us.
So Ty, you want to amend to add the drainage impact study?
Correct.
You second that, Mr. Clun?
Yeah.
Okay. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any objection? No one? Motion move forward. All right, moving to item number 7. Mr. O'Neill, if you don't mind, and then we will take the public comments. Please address the, to impose on temporary restriction on the placement of field for major and minor subdivision. If you can just go over the ordinance, if you don't mind.
in front of me.
You read it.
You don't have the ordinance.
Here you go. You got it.
It says, whereas Ascension Parish has experienced large population growth over the past few decades, which has placed a strain on parish infrastructure, including but not limited to drainage. Whereas there is a need to adopt the floodplain management plan, which is now in review and study. Whereas to allow time for the governing authority of Ascension Parish to consider all aspects of the floodplain management plan, modifications of parish codes to address those needs, there is a need to temporarily limit the placement of fill for major and minor subdivisions, the unincorporated portions of the East Bank of Ascension Parish not designated Zone X by the most recent FEMA flood maps for Ascension Parish. Now therefore by the Ascension Parish governing authority, as the effective date of this ordinance, and through either a 6-month period from the effective date of this, or as of the date of which the governing authority Ascension adopts an ordinance implementing a floodplain management plan, only if the date is sooner. No preliminary plat may be accepted for submission or approval of a major or minor subdivision which requires the placement of field in the unincorporated areas of the East Bank of Ascension Parish not designated Zone X for the most recent FEMA maps for Ascension Parish. If any portion of the ordinance is ever held invalid or unconstitutional for any reason by any court of competent jurisdiction over it, such portion shall be deemed separate and distinct, and independent provisions shall not affect the remaining provisions of the ordinance.
All right, thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Ms. Senator, you don't mind calling up people who have any public comments?
Chase Maloso.
Good evening, y'all. I'd like to first make a comment about the about what other parishes are doing with floodplain management. According to a study done by the University of Minnesota for the FEMA governing analysis, Ascension Parish is number 19 in the United States of population growth within the 100-year floodplain. Only 18 other parishes or counties rank ahead of us. So St. Tammany, East Baton Rouge, Assumption, none of those have what we have in common with our flood. So I just wanted to point that out. As far as the field goes, it's unrealistic to think that we can never not have field in a floodplain. Even if you put your house up in the air, you got to have dirt for a driveway. You're not going to put rocks and mud. But Miss Melissa has not told us anything tonight that we haven't known for 9 months. Her little show recommendations, all of this was here last May. So I think it's about time, until we get this ordinance back, if the ordinance comes back in a month, 2 months, or 3 months, we can stop permanent damage temporarily until we get this ordinance in place with the drainage impact study and also the floodplain management. We're not asking for permanent fill forever, and hopefully we can get it done within the 6 months. But this has bounced around at the EA Drainage Board for 8 months. The council send it right back to y'all. I think they kind of threw y'all under the bus there. And if I were y'all, I'd vote to send it right back to them and make everybody vote yes or no. If they want to stop permanent damage for a few months and put this in place or not. And if I were y'all, that's what I would do. Thank you.
Brandon Golson.
Evening, guys. So we've had floodplain management. We've had our drainage commissioner's had it ready for 9 months in his hands. We know that floodplain management calls for a limitation on fill. We know that. As a governing body, we've sat on our hands and we've kicked this can down the road far too many times. While we ignore our current citizens, we put water right on top of them by building up next to them. I'm in District 5. There's 3 or 4 examples of 6-foot mounds of dirt I'm looking eye to eye with from the road. That's not acceptable. The people next door, they don't deserve that because we're going to push development on top of them. We've seen water where water's never been. We have people with flooding houses that have never flooded, and I'm not talking about 16. I have a lady named Miss Darlene at the end of my road. Every time it rains, after our drainage department fixed her drainage, she gets water in her house. She's a widow. She's a 70-year-old widow. She doesn't deserve that. But we continue to build around them. Nobody on this council can honestly say that the overdevelopment we have experienced is not a major contributor to the drainage problem that we're having. I've heard multiple excuses of why floodplain management wasn't put out, from my councilman Dempsey saying the courthouse, that he wasn't going to go back against the courthouse. He wasn't going to implement it till then. To now we have some LSU grad students who are going to tell us what we paid the best of the best to tell us. It's not going to happen. Supposedly they're checking another councilman told me they're checking the economic impact on developers and builders is one of the things that LSU is looking at. But at what cost to our citizens? How many more people are we going to let flood while we let grad students look at what it's going to cost developers and builders? I don't know the last time you guys were out knocking on doors. I've been 2 or 3 months doing it myself. But this fill moratorium, the citizens want this. I've got my finger on the pulse of the citizens, especially in my district. They want this. So I can tell you that I think the voters want anything other than this right now. If you think they don't want anything other than this right now, then you're dead wrong. You've never been further away from your constituents than you are. Development's not reversible. So why are we putting in irresponsible developments when we don't know what they do? I've heard people say that we can't stop them because we don't know what it does. But we can't come back from that. Once we develop, we can stop development and study it. We can't develop and then go back and say, oh, we screwed up. We got to dig some more ditches. That's not how it works. Well, your legacy as a councilman, you want it to be that you voted for what the people wanted, which is this fill moratorium, or are you going to vote for the developers that pay campaign contributions? I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
Travis Joyner.
How y'all doing this evening? I'm gonna make it quick and short. If you pretty much don't vote for the fill moratorium, where's the water gonna go, like y'all said earlier? You know, you build up higher than your neighbor, guess what? Your neighbor's gotta spend more money. Like Mr. Ty, Mr. Randy, y'all have constituents that are still rebuilding. So why wouldn't you vote for a fill moratorium? Okay? I got a prime example behind my house that just got passed this past week. Who's to say that they're gonna go up 1 foot and not go up 2, 3 foot, which is gonna push a lot of water on Glenn Williams. Merritt Evans side, not so much, but Glenn Williams, absolutely. So, like Mr. Brandon Golson said, you can't go and undevelop to fix your problems. The fill moratorium is the best option at the moment. Now, everybody wants to build economy up. You can do that properly and take your time and get the studies done correctly. I'm for a fill moratorium for a little while until we can get the proper studies done. Y'all have a good night.
Thank you.
Jeff Pettit.
Good evening. It's been 20 months since this committee under the leadership of the former chairman, took up revising drainage impact studies for new development. Unfortunately for every resident of Ascension Parish, that task was taken from strategic planning and given to the East Ascension Drainage Commission. That commission has had HNTB's recommendation since May of 2018, and neither public discussion nor decisions have been made. Who benefited from the delay? The developers. 12 divisions and 845 rooftops approved using the old worthless drainage standards. The same thing happened with revised traffic impact studies. The administration buried the urban systems report in its recommendations for a year, and a council member did the same for another year. Who benefited? The developers. 19 subdivisions and 1,000 rooftops approved using the old worthless standards. Who is to blame? We all know. Who made a boatload of money? The developers. Who got hurt? Every citizen of Ascension Parish, both new and old. I would like to know, based on engineering best practices, what would HNTB recommend as to fill practices in a floodplain/flood zone? Not what made it into the final report before you tonight, but what best practices dictate is optimum. What does FEMA recommend? Are we considering the best engineering practices in the document before you tonight? Are these the best professional recommendations of HNTB? No fill should be allowed in a floodplain/flood zone. Pier and beam construction should be the method used if development is allowed at all. There is a reason our forebears built off the ground or didn't build at all. If a recommendation is to the amount, if any, of allowed fill will not be made to the parish council tonight, then this committee should, at a bare minimum, recommend to the council a moratorium to be put into place until that answer is delivered. Thank you.
Dempsey Pendarvis.
I'd like to thank y'all for allowing me this moment. I've listened to councilmen, I've listened to specialists, I've listened to everybody. I've been in this parish since I was for 67 years, a long time. Now, what this man said back here, that our surrounding parishes, their regulations, they don't have a limit of how high they can build up. If either one of y'all live on a lot 5, and lot 6 is on one side of you, lot 4 is on one side, 10's back, and you got a levee on the other side. If all of those lots build up and you stay in the bottom, guess who's going to get the water? That's just common sense. When I was a little boy, the Amite River flooded on a regular basis. I lived at Lake Martin. I can remember going back to the Lake Martin in a boat. You couldn't touch the ground with a paddle. They straightened out the Amite River, dredged it, when I was about 8, 9, 10 years old. I don't remember exactly, but I remember seeing the big drag lines running right with my Uncle Lim in the boat at night. Flooding went away. It went away. Now, the diversion canal was put in effect just a little bit before that. The water flow basically diverted out of the Amite River. If you go take any one of those horseshoes that they straightened out in the river, you can walk across any of them now. When the water quits going, they fill up. When we were kids, we did recreation and playing and swimming in the Amite River all through growing up. You could swim 3 foot off the bank and you couldn't touch bottom. You could go down what we call the cold water. You get down real deep, it'd be cold. 10 years ago, I did a project on Summerfield. I threw a stick out there for my dog to get it. He ran 30 foot out. So the problem is the canal is, the river, our drainage is filled in. If you don't think it doesn't fill in, the New River used to have river boats in it before our times. You can barely paddle a pirogue in it today because no more water flow, you know, it's just silted in. LSU says, I had a conversation with Mr. Joe Ellisord years ago when he was doing sod. He was taking dirt off sod. I said, Mr. Joe, you never have to put dirt back in here? He said, no, LSU says we take a ½ inch out a year, the ground grows 3/4 of an inch a year, with dust and settlement and everything else. So when you want to do a moratorium, you need to tell the lumber companies you need to go out of business. You need to tell the concrete companies you need to go out of business. You need to tell electrical supply places you need to go out of business. You know, in the United States of America, when they go into a housing slump, we go into recession. Why do we want to create a recession in Ascension Parish? Thank you.
Derek Murphy.
Good evening. You know, the standards in Ascension Parish aren't a joke. They are put in place and they're followed by many people that are in and out of this parish. Some live here, some work here, some have businesses here, but they're pretty stringent. Is it okay to put fill in a floodplain? The short answer is yes, if it's done properly. Your codes already talk about equivalently, hydraulic equivalent. FEMA says no adverse impact, not recommend no fill, except in V zones, except in critical zones. So what's in place? The 3-foot rule, when it was originally, if you remember one time before, the 3-foot rule was totally enacted. Engineers, some from the parish, some from the community, developers, all across, even some of y'all, even some staff got together and we met on our own time, on our own nickel. And we spent over a year, and that's where we coming up with the ½ acre. And because we didn't want people flooding out people next door, that's where we come out with, we can go a little bit higher if we got a little bit bigger lot. That way we could do mitigation and so forth. Every drop of dirt, every ounce of dirt that goes into the floodplain comes out of the floodplain with developments. It's proven. When you look at this, everybody's talking about this new policy. The only real big change is the 3-foot limitation. That's the only big change. It still has the floodplain mitigation. When you look at the drainage impact study policy and study it, it is not a joke. What's there now is not a joke because the ERA holds us to a standard that's basically now on paper. I will give you that. But we've already been doing that. We've already been running HECRAS models on every floodway coming through or every drainage basin coming through. We've already been making sure that we don't affect the upstream and downstream during a 100-year storm and so forth using HECRAS conveyance systems that you got to do now. We already follow a lot of the modeling that's just now in policy. So to come in here and say that that things aren't being done right up to now because it's not on paper is an inaccurate statement. It is being done right. So to come in here and say that no fill is going to make it all better, well, that's not necessarily true. So just keep that in mind when y'all are thinking about this. The rules, laws, regulations, and ordinances are stringent. They are enforced. I'm not going to say there aren't times that it's not, but on an overall, when you engineering community, it is enforced. Thank you.
No more speakers, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Okay, now I'm gonna open up the question to the council. Mr. Lawrence, you have one?
Well, I'll go first. I mean, this is something that I've been pushing. And there's a reason I'm pushing it, quite honestly. We don't know. We just had a discussion, lasted a pretty long time, about floodplain management, and it is apparent to me that we don't know exactly what's best for the parish, for the entire parish, for certain areas of the parish. We don't know whether it should be 3 feet. Maybe we don't know where flood ways are right now. We haven't mapped the entire parish. What I hear is we have a very complicated problem that we've had for the past 20 months, and we have some answers, but we don't have all of our answers. And that's my concern. You know, I don't want to pass a plan just to get something out there and say that we did something, pat ourselves on the back. I want to pass a plan that's good, that doesn't need, amendments by the boatload down the road because we didn't know what we were doing. I'd rather take the time, get the right thing, put it in place to protect our citizens, new and old. Because, I mean, what this makes me think of, if you got a child and you had a birthday party and that kid's got crawfish, he's got some lemonade sweetened with honey, and he loves his peanut butter chocolate cake, but at the end of that party, he is in anaphylactic shock, and you don't know why. And that kid is sitting there and he can't breathe. So you go and you get him an allergy test. They stick all the little things on his back, all the little needles on his back, and they tell you, well, you know what, in 3 weeks, we're going to know what put him in anaphylactic shock. So are you as a parent going to say, you know what, during that 3 weeks, I don't want to wait and find out. I'm going to let him eat whatever he wants. My kid may scream and cry, and he's going to whine that, oh, it's going to be rough and all this kind of stuff, and he's going to be yelling at you. But are you going to let that kid have the honey, which may have put him in anaphylactic shock? Are you going to let him have the peanut butter? Are you going to let him eat those crawfish? Could kill him. Well, that's what we're doing. We're sitting here saying we don't know what the future holds for certain areas of our parish. So let's just go ahead and keep building? No. Let's take a step back. Let's protect our neighborhoods, our areas, and say we don't have enough information right now. Nobody wants more studies, but I think what we've heard is we don't know exactly what the right plan is. We don't have a plan ready to be put in place. But why are we going to go out there? And I heard it tonight. Well, we got people that want to build subdivisions and build houses. Well, what if where they build those houses and where they build those subdivisions are in a floodway, which we've admitted we don't know where they are? What if they're in a critical area that can't handle 3, 4, 5 feet of fill? Because as it stands right now, you can put 6 feet of fill in there. You got to mitigate it, but you don't have to up to 3 feet. So what if they go in there and they throw in that fill, and then we find out later on that was a critical area? That was an area that should have only had a foot or should have only been pier and beam construction. At that point, your kid's already in anaphylactic shock because you gave him that peanut butter that he shouldn't have had because you couldn't wait a little while to make the right decision. We're talking 6 months here. We're talking 6 months, and we've heard it. We've had people that lived in this parish for 67 years, 100 years. You know, we've got people that have lived here for a long time, and are we going to tell them that we can't wait? And me, the next generation, that we can't sit here and wait for my next 60 years, or Doc will be here for another, what, year and a half? We move to St. Tammany? My point is, I
already lived there.
I know. True. My point is I think this is important to let's give ourselves the time to do what's right. And we may find out by the end of this 6 months that we've got a great plan that we can enact, that we're going to allow a certain amount of fill in some areas because that's the right thing to do, and that's good for that area. In other areas, we're not going to allow any fill. And you know what? In those areas, you're going to have to build up on pier and beam construction, which will be fantastic for the lumber companies. They will absolutely love that. You know, and we've heard this before, the traffic impact fees. What do we hear? If you pass this, it's going to completely shut down construction. It didn't. Quit crying wolf. It's not going to completely shut down construction, just like the traffic impact fees didn't do it. Simple as that. We have an opportunity here. We have to make sure that we do this right. I don't want to rush into anything. I don't think it's a good idea to rush into anything. We have some areas that really could benefit from some good planning. Now, this ordinance as it's written is not perfect. I think some of the things that I've learned is it should apply to anybody that has not submitted an application, because I don't want to go out there and if you've submitted an application to build your home and it's going through the process already, we could have some legal issues if we tell them, sorry, we're going to pull your ability to do that. The other part of it is, you know, from what I've heard tonight, maybe this should apply to the entire parish, not just A, E, V, whatever else we have. There are a lot of things after the A's, by the way. It should apply to X also, and I'm fine with that. I think the overall gist of this is, let's slow down for a second. We're not in a rush. This is not about instant gratification. We're adults here. Let's take the time to make the right decision. That's why I'm pushing this. That's why I believe it's a good idea. I think we can come up with a really good floodplain management and fill ordinance in the next 6 months. Something that everybody can live with. I am willing to compromise because we've heard it all before. We've heard many people say, you know what? No fill. That's the best thing. I agree it is. But you know what? That's not realistic. And I'm realistic. We're going to need some fill in some areas to help people build. To if they want to put their trailer down or their house down, let them level out the land. If they want to do pier and piling, man, that's fantastic. Let them do that. But let's take our time. Let's make sure we're getting this right. That's what I ask.
All right. Doc?
Basically, Mr. Chairman, I agree with Mr. Lawler. As a side note, tonight we heard that Mr. Kluat and I agreed a lot. Can you imagine that? That Mr. Lawler and I would agree a lot too. So keep wondering, so why are we having all these problems? We all agree. He talked about it being a complicated problem. I don't think anybody would debate that. No one sitting up here for sure, and I doubt you, if any, in the audience. But, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow committee members, we just can't further procrastinate beyond tonight, because it's not, as I said earlier, a question of if, but it's a question of when the next quote-unquote great flood is going to occur in Ascension Parish. I would also add that we flooded in 2016 despite Heckraft et al. Modeling, etc. I do not believe also, Mr. Lawler stated this, that it will produce a recession. He didn't put it in so many words. But, and he gave, I think, some good examples. I could actually give a few more, but I won't add it to the record. You know, I will say this, when developers told us that we make sidewalks in subdivisions and we force the planting of trees in the front and backyards of homes, et cetera, it's going to end development as we know it in this parish. And of course, we all know it's a very dated comment. That just didn't happen. So I don't believe it'll produce any kind of a building recession, whatever. We're talking about a temporary moratorium here. But one thing I am sure of, we need to get this right. And we need to get it right now. So I'm waiting to see what the motion's going to be. Rather not actually make it. It wasn't mine originally, and I realize Mr. Lawler can't do that because legal told us the same. Discuss but not motion to vote. But I think we've all kind of, under item 6, have agreed that we want administration to come back with the help of our aid gun, HNTB, disregarding anything that LSU, Mr. Chairman, might come up with, and add whatever's necessary yet with critical areas, regional detention ponds, whatever, and just without, as I agree with Mr. Kluat, asking a councilman what you want or anything, just put something forward and let's get it. In the meantime, I think we can have a moratorium, and I hope we do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Mr. Kluat. Oh, I'm sorry there. Todd. Go ahead, Todd. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You know, I keep hearing that we were rushing into it tonight. We've been studying this since May of last year, and we had public hearings on it. And I agree we need to move forward. Now, I don't know why it was delayed from the drainage. Chairman decided to kick it off. But if we do a moratorium in 6 months, we've been studying this for, 8 months already. And if you don't have a plan in 6 months, Mr. O'Neill, I think legally,
You need to come up with a plan.
you would have to have a plan within 6 months. And if you fail with that plan in 6 months, no better than what you are today, you did nothing but hurt, the parish. I'm willing to have special meetings. If administration can get this plan that HTB has got in front of us ready within a week, we can have a special meeting. I'm sure Chairman Joseph is ready for it. Get us here and let's move on it. We don't have to delay it. We got a plan on the table. Let's move forward. And you know, I'm kind of upset that, you know, it got delayed the first time off of drainage. And no one ever really give a reason why it got delayed. And I don't know why it got delayed neither. But I'm sure the administration can get it ready because HNTB has already done the work. And instead of putting a moratorium on, you know, that could affect some hardships of some people that's planning on building. I know they might not have the plans at the parish office right now for review, but within months or two, they plan on building, and it's going to affect them, you know, and it's going to hurt and have some hardships on some people. So I'm definitely not for a moratorium, but I'm definitely on moving forward with the plan. And I think there's a plan out there that we can move, and if it needs to be critiqued at a later, we can always amend that plan. It's a living document where we can come back and amend that ordinance. So that's pretty much my spiel on it.
Okay. Mr. Cagliari.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jerome, if we could, ask you to come up to the podium. You had said you invited Janet with CPEX to be
Yes, I
here
did.
tonight.
Yeah.
Could she come and give her input as to what her thoughts are on master plan and how something like this might affect
Sure.
the parish?
So I'm Janet Tharp from the Center for Planning Excellence in Baton Rouge and working on the parish's master plan. We're in the process now of putting all of the recommendations together and hoping to move that through in the next 3 or 4 months. And I think one of the most important ways that so far our recommendations will be affecting floodplain management is one of our recommendations is going from one building per acre to one building per 5 acres in floodplain areas, so that really having less density in those highly sensitive areas. So that's one change that you'll see in the plan that we're recommending, and we've done some land use modeling that shows it will have an impact on building in sensitive areas if the plan's followed. As far as moratoriums go, and I'm in no way an expert on drainage at all or floodplain management. We're partnering with HNTB and going to be incorporating their recommendations into the plan. So I really can't speak to floodplain management. In general, CPEX, and especially in coastal areas, we've recommended building 2 feet above base floor elevation and to up your points, and then limiting fill, especially in real sensitive areas like in Terrebonne and Plaquemines and Lafourche parishes. In general, I don't like. I don't know that I've ever recommended doing what's a building moratorium where you eliminate all building, because I think
We're not.
there. I know that I was getting there. So I would recommend not going that far, because I think there's a lot of legal issues. They're seldom effective, the ones that I've seen, and you really have to know exactly what you're going to do and change to be able to successfully have that moratorium. I think what y'all are talking about restricting fill, which means you could still develop. So technically, it's not really a moratorium. It's my understanding of what you're talking about. So there's a little bit of flexibility in there as far as if someone wanted to build. I do think you need to look carefully at anyone that's in the pipeline. If they've come to talk to Jerome, they really have, from just vesting laws, have a right to go ahead and pull permits and proceed with their development. So there's more of a limited amount of impact if you're talking 6 months, if a number of people have already come in. or come in before this is adopted. So that's about everything I have to say. I don't know if I've answered your question, but those were my thoughts.
I just wanted her input. Thank you.
Mr. Clark?
Yeah, real quick for Melissa or Joan, or Jerome, Melissa or Jerome. Okay, so we're looking at 6 months here. I don't know, that may be arbitrary, what, Mr. Lawler threw out. He's thrown out moratoriums in the past, so, I don't know. I don't know, so you tell me, what's feasible? Is it feasible for y'all to come back with something for us to look at and vote on in a month? 2 months?
Well,
What?
I'll let Melissa answer what's
Okay.
feasible in terms of HNTB, but I will let you know that what Janet said is correct, that any project that's in the pipeline right now, if they have submitted an official application for development, they will be heard before the Planning Commission, and they would not be subject to any kind of limitation on time or anything else on their subdivision. They're going to have to move forward. We've only had one pre-application within the last week, I think it was last week, for a new project that might be coming on board. They have yet to fill the application and submit it. But if they were to submit that application prior to this ordinance becoming effective, they would go through the pipeline as it is right now. State law requires that we schedule a meeting, a hearing before the Planning Commission within 60 days. If that does not occur, that preliminary plat becomes official and it becomes approved, right? So we have 60 days from when they file an official application to when we hear the matter before the Planning Commission, right? So just to let you know that. But I'll let Melissa answer the question about the timing of the study.
And that goes out to the administration also, Mr. Dawson, so overall, what have we,
Ken?
I say it goes out to the administration also, and Melissa can, since they apparently have to do 99% of the work, what the hell's feasible? Throw 6 months out. Generally, when I give somebody 6 months, they take 6 months. That's
Well, the plan as we outlined is going to take longer than 6 months. I mean, that's
Okay.
what we had outlined, and I certainly don't think we could have floodways established for all the different channels within that time frame. I was looking at, the LSU, maybe, I don't know exactly what they're going to do yet. I'm kind of hoping what they do is kind of complements what we've already suggested. So I can't say that in 6 months we would have anything different at this time besides what the LSU might bring to the table.
Well, that's what I'm saying, so, I lean a little bit in favor of the restrictions tonight. So what I want to know, what's real? Is this just thrown out there, 6 months, we're going to deliver something? You telling me in 6 months we're not, and I know you're not going to have the floodways because it takes a hell of a study to do that, all right? But something, do you have our drainage impact study? Do you have the ordinances in front of us and recommendations on fill that we can pass? We have some fill ordinance in place already, but, on things that the policies and the ordinances complement each other. So something that we can pass. And a recommendation on fill, which you've done that somewhat already.
Yes.
So we got 6 months written down on paper today, okay? So what does 6 months mean? There's nothing, y'all telling us right now that 6 months ain't gonna do it. I'm not getting any.
Mr. Clark, I don't want.
Yes, sir.
If
Go
you
ahead.
don't mind.
Keep me in
I
line,
just want
sir.
to make sure, because I see what you're saying, but this was supposed to be a result of what LSU study come back with, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Jerome?
I don't remember the exact motion.
Well, I'm not sure what was intended when the motion was first made or the ordinance was put forward.
We was going to
Initially, what several of us on the council were told is that we were waiting on this LSU study to move forward with a fill ordinance and all of our drainage stuff. That's what we're told initially, is that that's what we're waiting on. Once we got that, we can move forward. That's why this
That's what
was.
leadership said.
Exactly. That's why this was
Council leadership.
6 months
We have
until we get that.
revelations tonight, that study is
I
going to
understand.
show us what
Okay,
a general
now you can
outlook
take
of the
the floor.
region is, and not exactly what we need to do within our district.
Right, right.
Mr. Chair.
Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With all respect due to Councilman Todd Lambert, considering, I would suggest this, the record of procrastination that we've already seen to date in doing anything with HNTB's recommendations, I'm just not sure that I share the same belief that the administration and, put the fingers at both places, the council, can enact new laws anytime soon. However, let's think about this. And let me add too, before I make this statement of what I favor. CPEC speaker also said moratoriums seldom work. I wonder about that. Maybe they don't know the parishes. I'd be willing to bet my next paycheck it'll work here. And we can have the best of both worlds. So here's the Doc compromise. Could we possibly pan the fill language in the ordinance and advance and approve a motion to recommend that we enact this temporary moratorium for 6 months until HNTB's recommendation modifications of the same are enacted into law by the council, with the caveat, you see it a lot, whichever comes first. So, if we can do this quickly in a month, 2 months, 3 months, we're not putting anybody out of business or nothing. And we'll have it into law. What's there to fear, if you believe that? If you don't, at the end of 6 months, we'd have to ask legal, what would happen? The moratorium would expire, and we'd be right back where we are. But in the meantime, I think it would have gotten a lot of people's attention. My guess is the developers are going to come out of the woodwork to both the council members and the administration saying, get this law passed, because whatever it is, we're going to have to and want to work within it. Don't let it go on too long, because you can be maybe infecting my livelihood. So what's wrong with whatever comes first? I'll just call that the Doc compromise.
Okay. Mr. Dawson wanted to reply. I'll get you right next time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real quick on Councilman Kluwat hit on something I think that we need to clarify a little bit and make sure, because I think you were right in the right direction. HNTB did go through a process. We'll look at making a recommendation on what field should be. Okay, I just want to make sure that that's understood. They did, and they had the recommendations. They also look at the ordinances and things that needed to be changed. And am I right, Melissa?
Yeah.
The ordinances that need to be changed in order to implement, to make a recommendation on field. Now, it also is true that if we want to go more detail and then begin to specify, which I think this committee said, you may want to change something later if you want things more detailed. That's something that could be done with further additional studies. But there was something that was done. There was a recommendation prepared that actually addressed what a field should be. The ordinances and work were done. I think Melissa said she worked very closely with Sean to make sure that all these things, were consistent across the board, from the ordinances and the codes and that kind of thing, and that was ready to move forward. So that could be brought back pretty quickly with just dusting it off a little bit and bringing it in. And this committee can decide, if there's additional work to be done at that point. But I want to make clear there is something ready to go.
So what you're telling me is, it's been mentioned about 17 times tonight that, we've been having it since May, or it's been
Exactly right, sir.
available since May.
Thank you, sir.
Right, giving different arguments. Melissa, you're shaking your head right there. And Sean, you kind of agree on the ordinance side. So, basically, if you got it written down, within a month, you could get it to us. I don't know. Tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Or
What your
2 weeks.
recommendations were for the last
A week or two.
8 months,
Turn
you
them
could
in.
get it to us pretty quick,
So,
all right? Because the only thing you gotta do is get it in front of 11 council members. That's it.
That's already been done.
Somebody's gonna vote on it,
I think Todd was before me.
Yeah, and he kind of stole it there, but, and I agree, I think y'all can have it ready, y'all have a plan ready for us, and again, We don't have to wait a month for another strategic meeting. We can have special meetings. We do that all the time.
Yep.
Let's get this going, and by the first meeting in March, at the first council meeting in March, we could be ready to move with a form, with an ordinance, with a working document that we can move forward with. And because like Randy said and a few other ones said, 6 months, what's saying that, what else can you bring me in 6 months? You know, you said it won't, what needs to happen with the whole plan, you won't have ready. And at that point, we wasted 6 months. Because we can move forward with a document today, or 2 weeks from now, and get going. And it is a living document where it can be changed. If we need to critique it, we could, you know, make it strenuous. Which I think, according to some of the other parishes, we do have some pretty strict, like a couple of people up here talk, you know, guidelines that they have to follow to develop. And we want to make them tougher. We want to improve on the drainage impact study. You know, it needs to be a little bit more strenuous, but that's things we can do. And I think it's ready. We paid for it, and it was showed to us May of last year. It's ready. It's there. And everybody up at this council met with them individually and spoke on, you know, the plan that's on the table, you know, tonight. She just needs to bring the document to us and let's move forward.
All right, Mr. Lawless.
Real quick, and just so the public also knows, this is not about stopping people from building their houses. This is about building their houses in a more intelligent way, making sure it's safe to do so. People will still be able to, if they have a lot and they want to bring in a plan to the parish, they can build it on pier and piling, on pier and beam. They can build it on brick, like, you know, the houses in Old Gretna. There are many, many ways, and I'm sure Jerome and Melissa could talk about the many other ways that they can raise a house without pier or without using fill. That's all this is. People can certainly come into this parish during this time period and build. That's why I hate to hear people say, you're going to put us out of business, you're going to put the carpenters out of business. That's a bunch of baloney. It's not. You could still build a house, and, you know, I drive down 42 every day. Ryan Ingram, I don't even know the guy. He's a home builder or something, but his office is built on 42. It looks like a house, and it's raised, and it's on bricks. It looks fantastic. I see houses all over the parish that are built up. You know where they're not? They're not in tract subdivisions where they just build. What they are, it's the private owners that realize that they want to build a really nice house, so they build it up. And they do a great job with it, and it looks wonderful. And the water flows right underneath it if it has to, and the water below it, it gets saturated. The ground below it gets saturated with storm runoff. So it can be done. People can continue to do that, and that's what we need to encourage the entire parish to do from here on out. I can tell you, if I could do it all again, I'd build my house up. That way you don't have to crack through a foundation to go fix your plumbing. But that's it. That's all I got.
Oh, all right. So what I'm hearing, been a long night here. I had the quickest meeting at one time. I got the longest meeting right now. Go ahead, Todd.
I got one just little comment on Mr. Aaron. You know, he talks about building off the ground, and I live in a house that's off the ground. Efficiency-wise, that's why people build on a slab. You off the ground, heating and cooling is a whole lot tougher to heat and cool a home. I have a little 1,500 square foot home and pay $365 a month to cool that thing in the summertime. You probably got a 3,000 square foot on a slab, and you pay a whole lot less.
Not quite that big, but we pay about the same.
So just a heads up, house off the ground might aesthetics look good, but the efficiency of operating a house off the ground is a little bit more costly.
Look, I understand that, and I understand that's a trade-off that some people make.
All right.
But there are insulation ways.
Let's call it order. Let's stick to the field. Let's stick to the field, please. I understand everybody concerned, but right now, I'm gonna bring this to a closure we can have a special meeting and HNTB
I
come
make that
back.
motion, Mr. Chairman.
Now, before you do that, Mr. Todd, what date you want that?
As soon as they can get it ready.
H.
We'll put it on her show. We're gonna put it on Miss Melissa's show.
Is that tomorrow?
2 weeks, 1 week?
Y'all discuss that or whatever, I mean,
Just based on discussion, we do know that there are a few tweaks that do need to be made, but I don't think it will take very long to do those tweaks. And also the last detention thing that was passed, so we have to make sure we get
The
that. in-
25-year?
Yeah.
When is the date?
okay, Mr. Shaw.
Yeah, there's been a slight wrinkle since the last May. There's a whole new 2510 language. That, in this timeline you asked for us on the update the drainage ordinance policy, at least give us the opportunity of fit in one council meeting. Should we need to go back to the council to ask for clarification of an intent, the intent of the most recent change.
So what are you
So
saying?
I'm saying a month would be sufficient. I mean, month, we can get it all cleared up sooner than that, we can do that, but I would just at least give us an opportunity for at least to go one more council meeting, clear up a recently passed drainage ordinance change.
So the second
Because that
meeting,
impacts a ripple.
second
effect.
meeting in March, you could have us a document ready to move on.
That's all.
And that would be,
30 days.
March what?
that would be
Chairman.
March 21st.
We are most likely going to cancel. The first meeting in March will be a conference.
So it'd be the only meeting in March. In March.
Would be the 21st.
Okay, so.
And we can meet
Do you want it
as a
back in
committee
front of this
prior to
committee
that.
before that, or
Right,
what?
well, yeah, I think it should come to the committee prior to,
Set your
and then
calendar and make that.
if parties agreed on that. I mean, we still haven't made a motion yet, but we still discussing this. Now, somebody make a motion
that
and get the vote?
That we, bring a document to us at the first meeting in March, which will be, I guess, the 21st.
Strategic planning, back to strategic planning.
And go to strategic first with it and have
Go full
them bring
council.
us the living document that we're gonna look at.
At next month's strategic planning meeting.
Next month,
Or if we need, make sure it's before the council meeting,
okay.
Second.
if we have to change that date.
All right, I got a motion from Todd and second by, Mr. Cagalati on the motion. Any objection?
Questions?
Doc have a question.
Is that a votable document we talking about?
Yeah, that is the document that HMT is gonna bring back. That is the
Yeah,
vote,
buddy.
that is it. When it come through here, I'm hoping it move on.
It'll be an actionable, votable item on our next strategic planning committee meeting.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's
Without
what-
asking any
To
councilman, as we
recommend
said about.
to the full council.
Yes, we're always a recommending committee. All committees are. Without asking councilmen or anything, as Randy said earlier, and I
Yeah.
have appreciation for that. This is what we think, this is what we, Melissa, know you should do. And you can either follow our recommendations or not.
You got a date for this meeting?
Senator, I'm pretty sure we're gonna be on a Tuesday. It'll be like the 10th or the 11th.
You want to have an opportunity for strategic planning before that council meeting?
So it should be by the 11th, I mean, between the 12th. It'll be on March 12th. I'm correct?
No.
Okay, so, all right, any more questions? All right, any objection to the motion? No objection to the motion? Motion passed. All right, moving on to item number 8.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion to adjourn. Meeting adjourned.